The midwife had already wrapped the child when the physician spoke the words that would follow Aeliana for the rest of her life. "There is no father listed. The mother came to us alone." She had not yet risen from the birthing bed, but she already knew how the court would decide this. A woman without a husband's name was a woman without protection, and a child without a father was a stain the kingdom would spend years trying to scrub away. She had watched it happen to other women in the harbor district. She had watched the whispers close over their heads like water, watched them grow small and gray and apologetic, watched the light go out of them one winter at a time. She had promised herself, in the long dark months of carrying her son alone, that whatever else the world did to her, she would not go small. Snow pressed against the infirmary windows. It had been snowing the night Corvin left her at the edge of the village, with nothing but a traveling cloak and a lie about returning by spring. Spring had come and gone 3 times over. Now the cloak was threadbare. The lie had a name and a face, and both belonged to a man who had ridden east and never looked back. Aeliana pulled her son closer. He was small and warm and utterly unbothered by the disgrace he had been born into. His fists were curled against her collarbone, and when he yawned, it was the whole of his face, unguarded, the way only the newly born can be unguarded. "I will raise him myself," she said. "You will need a trade then, and a story. Better than the truth. She had a trade. She mended nets and sails down at the harbor, her fingers quick and sure with a needle, her hands roughened by salt and rope. It was honest work, and it fed her, barely. The men who owned the boats trusted her stitching over anyone's. On the waterfront, a net she had mended did not fail, and a sail she had patched held through the worst of the autumn gales. What she did not have was a story. She had refused from the first to invent a dead husband or a soldier lost at sea. She would not build her son's life on a fiction. If the world wanted to call her ruined, it could. She knew what she was, and she knew what she was not. What she was not. What she had never told a living soul. What she had folded away so deep inside herself that some days she almost forgot it was ordinary. Her grandmother had taken her hands when she was 7 years old and turned them over and traced the lines of her palms and gone very quiet, and then said, in the low voice she used for the things that mattered, "Older than this harbor, older than this kingdom maybe. Keep it close, keep it quiet. The world does not love a woman who is more than it expects her to be." Aeliana had not understood. Then, she had learned, by the way, certain things came too easily to her hands. The reading of weather, the sense of a storm 2 days out, the way animals gentled around her and frightened children calmed, small things. Nothing a person could point to, nothing a person could burn her for. But there, all the same, like a current running under still water, she had kept it close, and she had passed something of it she suspected to the child now sleeping against her chest, because there was a mark on his wrist that had not come from her side of anything, and she had spent 6 weeks pretending she had not seen it. The summons came 6 weeks later, and it did not come gently. 2 soldiers in the black and silver of the Royal Guard arrived at her door before dawn. They did not knock so much as fill the frame of it, and the older of the 2 read from a sealed writ, in a voice pitched to Carrie. By order of the Crown, the woman Aeliana of the Harbor District is commanded to appear in the Hall of Judgment on a matter concerning the royal line. The neighbors had begun to gather. They always did. In the Harbor District, dawn was when the fishing crews stirred, and the arrival of 2 royal soldiers at the door of the unwed net mender was worth being late to the boats for. Aeliana stood in her doorway with her son bound to her chest beneath her shawl, and felt the old familiar heat of 100 watching eyes. "There is no matter concerning me and the royal line," she said. "You have the wrong woman. The writ names you. The infirmary records name you. You will come, or you will be brought." She looked at the 2 of them. Young men, both. The younger, barely old enough to hold the halberd he leaned on, his face still round beneath the helm. They were only doing what men in black and silver were told to do. But there was a difference between doing a thing and enjoying it, and the older one, she saw, was watching her with the flat, bored contempt of a man who had decided long before he reached her door. "I will come," she said, "but I will not be brought. I will walk to your hall of judgment on my own 2 feet, with my son in my arms, through my own streets, and no man will lay a hand on me to do it. Is that understood?" The older soldier's jaw worked. He was not accustomed to being addressed so by anyone, let alone a harbour woman in a mended dress. But something in her voice, the absolute flatness of it, the total absence of any hope of being obeyed and any fear of being refused, made him hesitate. "On your feet, then," he said, "but you'll walk between us." "I will walk where I please, and you may walk near me, if it comforts you." She would not be dragged through her own streets like a criminal. Not with her child watching from her arms, even if he was too young to remember it. She held her head level, and she walked, and the 2 soldiers fell in on either side of her, and if her heart was hammering hard enough to wake the baby, no one could see it. The neighbors parted for the small procession. She saw pity on some faces, and hunger on others. The hunger of people who had been small and grey for so long that they took a kind of comfort in watching another woman finally be taken down. She met all of it with the same level look, and she did not slow, and she did not look back. The Hall of Judgment was a cavern of grey stone at the heart of the upper city, cold enough that her breath ghosted in front of her face. Courtiers lined the walls in their winter finery, furs and jeweled clasps and slippers that had never touched a harbour stone, and every one of them turned to look at the woman being brought in from below. She heard the whispers start before she had crossed a third of the floor. The unwed one, the one with the fatherless child. What could the crown want with her? Look at her dress. Look at how she carries herself. Who does she imagine she is? At the far end, on a dais of black marble, sat the king. She had never seen him. Few in the harbour district ever had. He was younger than the stories made him sound, and larger than the throne seemed built for. A broad-shouldered figure, in dark grey, with a circlet of iron rather than gold. His eyes were a pale, unsettling silver, the colour they said of the old bloodline, the one that ran back to the founding of the kingdom. A thin white scar cut through one eyebrow. When he shifted his weight, the whole hall seemed to hold still around him, the way a room stills when a predator enters it, and the courtiers who had been so bold in their whispering fell quiet the moment his gaze moved anywhere near them. King Rowan Vial, the Iron King, a man who had taken the throne at 20 and held it against 3 uprisings before he was 30, and who had never in all that time named a queen or fathered an heir. They said the crown had burned it out. They said a great many things in the harbour district about the man on the black marble dais, and none of them had prepared Aeliana for the way he was looking at her now. Not at the spectacle of her, the way the courtiers looked at her. And there was something in his face she could not read, something that was not contempt, which was the only thing she had prepared herself to receive. A steward stepped forward and unrolled a scroll. The crown has summoned this woman on the following matter. 6 weeks past, a child was born to her in the harbor infirmary. The child bears a mark. She knew the mark. Of course she knew the mark. It curled across the inside of his left wrist, a fine silver tracery like frost on a window, and she had told herself for 6 weeks that it meant nothing, that it was a birthmark. She had kept his sleeve pulled down. She had kept him out of sight. She had done everything a frightened woman does to make a truth stay hidden, and some part of her had known the whole time. Truths like that have a way of walking into halls of grey stone and demanding to be seen. "Show the court the child's wrist," the steward said. "No," Aeliana said. Silence fell so completely she could hear the torches gutter in their brackets. The steward blinked at her. No one refused a command in the Hall of Judgment. The whole apparatus of the place existed on the assumption that its commands would be obeyed. "You are ordered to." "He is 6 weeks old." Her voice shook, and she let it shake, because a voice that shakes and does not stop is a stronger thing than a voice that never trembled at all. "He does not belong to this court. He does not belong to your records, or your marks, or your morning summons. He belongs to me, and I will not put him on display for a room full of people who have already decided what I am." She looked past the steward, past the courtiers in their furs, to the man on the dais. "If the king wishes to see my son, the king may ask me himself, as one person asks another." The gasp that went through the hall was a living thing, somewhere. A courtier laughed, high and disbelieving, the laugh of someone watching another person walk cheerfully off the edge of a cliff. The older soldier beside her went rigid, one hand drifting toward her arm as if to punish the insolence himself, to restore by force the order she had so casually broken. Rowan-Viel raised a single finger, and the soldier froze. The king rose. He came down from the dais, which he was not supposed to do, which no one had ever seen him do for a supplicant, and a fresh murmur ran through the court, sharper than the last, because whatever was happening now was outside the script that governed this room. He crossed the black marble floor with an unhurried stride until he stood close enough that she had to tilt her chin up to hold his gaze. Close enough that she caught the scent of him, cold and clean like snow and iron and something older underneath, something she had no name for and yet somehow, distantly, recognized. His voice was quieter than she expected. It was not the voice of a man performing for a hall. It was pitched for her, and her alone, and the whole court had to strain and go silent to catch it. "You are entirely right, and every person in this room, including myself, has forgotten their manners." He inclined his head. A small and impossible thing, a king bowing a fraction to a harbor woman in a mended dress. "I would like very much to see your son's wrist, not because I command it, because I think I already know what I will find there, and I have been waiting a long time to be proven right or wrong." Aeliana stared at him. "Why?" she managed. "Would the king of anything be waiting on the wrist of a child from the harbor?" Something crossed his face then. Grief, she realized. Old grief, worn smooth. The kind a person stops noticing they carry until something presses on it. "Because the mark your son carries has appeared exactly once in 400 years, Rowan said, "in the founding of this kingdom. In my own bloodline it cannot be inherited from the mother's side. No magic of the common blood can make it. It passes only through the blood of the Vale kings." He held her gaze, and there was no triumph in it, only a terrible carefulness. The carefulness of a man handling something that might break in either of their hands. It means the child's father is of my line, and there is only one man of my line living. The hall had gone utterly silent. Even the torches seemed to have stilled. "There is only me," said Rowan Vial. She refused to believe it in the small private room they brought her to, away from the eyes of the court. She refused it, while a maid brought hot water and warm bread and a soft blanket for the child, laying each thing down with the wide-eyed care of a servant who did not understand what was happening, but understood that it was enormous. She refused it while the king himself sat across a plain wooden table from her, having dismissed his guards to the far side of the door with a single gesture. "I have never met you," she said. "I have never been within a mile of this palace before this morning. I don't know how you think a child of yours could be sleeping in my arms, but you are mistaken, and the sooner you understand that, the sooner my son and I can go home." "Tell me about his father." The gentleness of it undid something in her. She had told no one. The whole of it. Not the neighbors, not the physician, not even herself, not out loud, not in words laid end to end, where she would have to look at the shape they made. "His name was Corvin," she said. "He came to the harbor 4 springs ago. Tal, a traveler?" he said. "Charming. The kind of charming you don't trust, and can't help trusting anyway. He courted me for a season, and he did it properly, patiently, the way no one had ever bothered to court a net mender before. He married me in the small chapel by the water, and for a little while I was happy." She turned her cup slowly in her hands, watching the steam rise off it. "Then one night he was gone. He left a note saying he had business east and would return by spring. There was money folded in with it, enough for a season, and I took that to mean he was serious, that he truly meant to come back. I waited 2 years before I stopped waiting, and the child came after a night near the very end, before he left. I did not even know I carried the boy, until Corvin was long gone. By the time I was certain there was no one left to tell, Rowan had gone very still. She watched his hands where they rested on the table, and she saw them change, saw the fingers. "Describe him," he said, and his voice had roughened. "Corvin, his eyes." Aeliana frowned pale grey, almost silver, in a certain light. "I used to think it was—" She stopped. "Beautiful," Rowan finished quietly. "We all have them. The veil eyes. My grandfathers were said to stop conversation in a room." He set his hands flat on the table again, deliberately, as if forcing them still, and she saw that they were not quite steady. "Corwin with a W? Older than me by 2 years. He should have been king. The throne was his by every right of birth, and he did not want it. That was the great trouble of our childhood, that the crown fell to the son who wanted the road and passed over, the son who might have borne the weight of it more easily. Corwin wanted the horizon. Any life but the one the crown demanded. He used to say, a kingdom was just a cage. Large enough that you could forget the bars. Rowan's mouth twisted, not quite a smile. He vanished from court 11 years ago, and let the throne fall to me. I sent riders down every road in the kingdom, and across 2 borders. Nothing. I thought him dead. I mourned him dead. I built a memorial to a man who, it seems, was alive the whole while, mending his heart back together in a harbor town by marrying a woman who mended nets. The room seemed to tilt around her. He changed one letter of his name, Rowan said, and disappeared into the country he was born to rule. And somewhere along the road, he married a woman who mended nets and gave her nothing but a lie and a child he never knew he made. His jaw tightened, until she could see the muscle stand out beneath the scar. That is not a story I am proud to tell you. It is my brother's shame. And by blood, by the blood we share, the same blood in that boy's wrist, a little of it is mine to carry too. I am sorry, for whatever that is worth, from a stranger who summoned you before dawn. I am sorry for what he did to you. Aeliana looked down at her sleeping son, at the silver mark on his wrist, half visible past the edge of his wrap, catching the lamplight the way frost catches the first grey light of morning. At the pale lashes on his cheek, so like the lashes of a man who had left her in the snow. Then, he is not yours? She said slowly, working it through. He is your brother's, your nephew. By blood, but your Corwin, my Corwin, abandoned you both. He renounced the name when he vanished. In the eyes of the law, he set aside every claim he might have passed to a son. And the law of this kingdom is old and strange, older than either of us, written when the founding blood was the only thing that held the realm together. He leaned forward across the plain table. A child of the Vael line, who bears the founding mark, is heir to the throne, regardless of which son of the line sired him. If no closer claim stands in the way, my brother renounced his place. That boy asleep in your arms is the nearest living blood of the founding line, and he carries the mark that has not been seen in 400 years. He said the next words, carefully watching her face as he laid them down. Your son is the rightful heir of this kingdom, and you are the mother of the king's heir, which makes you, whether this court likes it or not, whether every furred lord in that hall chokes on it or not, a woman it can no longer afford to call ruined. She should have felt relief, vindication. The whole cruel machinery of the harbor's judgment overturned in a single morning, by the highest authority in the land. She should have wept with the release of it. Instead, she felt the walls of a new cage assembling around her, more gilded than the old one, but a cage all the same. And she thought of her brother-in-law's words that she had never heard him speak. A kingdom is just a cage large enough that you can forget the bars. So that is what I am now, she said. A vessel, a womb that happened to carry the right blood. You will take my son and raise him in silk and make him a king, and give me a comfortable room in some quiet wing and a title to keep me pleasant, and I will be expected to be grateful for it, to curtsy and weep and thank the crown for its mercy. Is that what you think I am offering? It is what men like you always offer. She stood. The chair scraped back across the stone. Her son stirred against her and settled. I raised him alone when the whole world told me I could not. I mended nets with him strapped to my back through a whole autumn of storms. I went hungry so that he would not, more nights than I will ever tell him. I sat up with him through 3 fevers, with no one to spell me and no physician I could pay. And now that he is worth something to a crown, now that his wrist has a use, the crown remembers I exist. Her voice was steady and low and furious, and it did not shake at all now because this was not fear. This was the far side of fear. So here is my condition, Rowan Vael, and understand that it is not a request. And understand that there is no version of this where you refuse it, and I bow my head anyway. If my son is to be your heir, then I raise him. not a council of grey men deciding in a locked room what he is permitted to become me. I stay at his side. I have a voice, a real one, not a decorative one, in every choice made about his life, his lessons, his future, until he is old enough to make those choices for himself. And I am not a vessel to be thanked and quietly set aside. Once the milk is done, I am his mother. I remain his mother, fully and completely, in this palace or out of it. At the head of your court, those are my terms. She held his silver gaze without flinching. Refuse them, and you can chase your heir across the harbor for the rest of your reign. Because I will take him, and I will vanish the way your brother vanished. And I promise you, King, I am a great deal better at disappearing than a prince who left a note and a purse of coin ever was. He wanted to be found eventually. I will not. For a long moment the King of the Iron Throne said nothing at all. He looked at her across the plain wooden table, this woman in a mended dress, who had come into his hall as a prisoner, and was now issuing terms to him as though the crown were hers to bargain over, and she could not read what moved behind those pale eyes. Then, slowly, he smiled, and it changed his whole hard face, softened the iron of it, made him look for a moment like the younger brother he must once have been, the second son who had watched the first one long for the horizon, before crowns and uprisings. You know, he said, in 11 years, no one in this palace has told me no and meant it, not truly. They flatter, they maneuver. They tell me what they believe I wish to hear, and call it counsel. My own ministers have raised the question of my heir 100 times, and every one of them had a daughter or a niece to put forward a bargain folded inside the concern. He rose from his chair, and he inclined his head to her. Deeper this time, deep enough that there could be no mistaking it for anything but what it was. I accept your terms. Every one of them. Not because your son is my heir, and I have no other, and the law leaves me little room to refuse. He paused, and his gaze did not leave hers. I accept them because a boy raised by a woman who would vanish rather than be set aside is a boy who will grow into a far better king than one raised by flatterers and frightened tutors. And because I think this court, this whole, cold, gilded, whispering court, has needed someone in it who is not afraid of it for a very long time, perhaps longer than I have held it. Not that day, and not for many days after. Trust was not a thing Aeliana gave, because a powerful man had said the right words in a warm room. She had married the last man who said the right words, and he had left her in the snow. So, she watched. She moved into the palace because her son's safety demanded it, and she watched the crown keep its promises one by one, waiting for the catch. The rooms they gave her opened onto a garden, not a locked wing. When she said she wanted her son's cradle in her own chamber, and not a distant nursery staffed by strangers, the cradle was moved that same afternoon. When the council convened to discuss the heir's upbringing and she walked in uninvited and sat down at the table, 3 ministers looked to the king to have her removed. And the king only gestured to the empty chair beside his own and said, "The boy's mother sits at these meetings. Those who dislike it may absent themselves, and no one absented themselves." When a tutor of noble blood spoke to her once as though she were a servant who had wandered above her station, he was gone from the palace by the end of the week, and no explanation was offered to anyone, and none was needed. She kept waiting for the bars of the cage to close. Instead, one at a time she found the doors standing open. And Rowan, she began to call him Rowan, in the privacy of the garden, though never in the hall. Rowan did a thing she had not braced for. Because it had not once occurred to her that a king might do it, he did not court her. He did not send jewels, or make speeches, or arrange to be found gazing at her across crowded rooms. He simply talked to her, in the evenings, when the work of the crown was done. He asked her about the harbor, and listened to the answers. He told her about his brother, the real Corwin, the boy he had been before he became a wound, the older brother who had taught Rowan to ride and to swim and to lie convincingly to their tutors, who had wanted so badly to be free that he had thrown away a crown and in the end a wife and a son as well. Rowan did not defend him. He grieved him and condemned him in the same breath. And Aeliana understood, slowly, that the man across the table from her was the only other person in the world who had been left behind by the same person she had been left behind by. They had that in common, the king and the net-mender. They had both loved Corwin Vial, and they had both been abandoned by him. And they were both raising, in their separate ways, the child he had never bothered to know. She was careful, in her own mind, not to call it love, but it was something. It was the melting of ice on the harbor, slow, and then sudden, and only when the season is truly ready. The public reckoning came a fortnight later, and it did not go the way Aeliana feared. The court had assembled again in the Hall of Judgment, summoned to hear the crown's ruling on the harbor woman and her fatherless child. The whispers had had 2 weeks to grow teeth. They had a new shape now, sharper and more dangerous than mere scorn, for it was one thing to whisper about a ruined net-mender, and quite another to whisper about a woman who dined at the king's table and sat at his council, and had somehow, in the space of a fortnight, made herself impossible to remove. Sorceress, some of them murmured. Now, she has bewitched him. What natural thing could raise a harbor woman so high, so fast? She could hear it as she entered, but this time she entered, not between 2 soldiers, but at the king's own side, her son in her arms, in a gown the color of deep harbor water that she had chosen herself and that made no apology for the woman inside it. And the whispers, when they saw her come in so, curdled into something closer to fear. And there, near the front, pushed forward by the machinery of the court, stood a man she had not expected to ever see again in this life. Corwin. Whatever his name truly was, he had been found. Of course he had been found. A man of the Vael line does not stay hidden once his brother, the king, has both a reason and a mark to search by. He stood in traveling clothes with the pale, vile eyes downcast, older than she remembered, grayer at the temple. And he did not meet her gaze, and Aeliana felt the old wound tear open, and then, strangely to her own quiet astonishment, begin to close. Because she had built this man into a giant in her mind, a great cruelty that had broken her life in half. And here he was, in the flesh. Only a man, a smaller man than his brother. Man who could not lift his eyes to look at the woman he had left in the snow, or at the son he had made and never held. The king did not raise his voice. He never needed to. "My brother," Rowan said, and the word rang through the silent hall, and every furred lord and jeweled lady leaned forward to hear it. Presumed dead these 11 years, mourned by a kingdom, memorialized in stone at the cost of the crown. Found, living, hale, under a false name, having abandoned a wife and an unborn child, to poverty and disgrace, and never once sent word that he lived. He let the words settle over the assembled court like the snow settling beyond the high windows. This court was quick. A fortnight passed, to name a woman ruined. Quick to summon her before dawn. quick to line these walls and whisper as she was brought through them. Let the same court now hear the truth of who was ruined in this matter, and by whose hand. Corwin flinched. He knew, as everyone in the hall was beginning to know, what was coming. "You had a wife," Rowan said to his brother. And now there was iron under the quiet, the iron the whole kingdom feared. "You had a son coming, though you fled before you could know it. You had every road in this kingdom to walk, and every horizon you ever longed for. And you chose the coward's path along all of them, the path that left a woman alone in a harbor town, to bear your child in an infirmary with no name to give him." His voice never rose, and that was the terrible thing about it. It grew quieter and colder, and more absolute the further it went. "You will not be executed. You are my blood, and I have buried enough of my blood, and I will not add the killing of my brother to the account of this family whatever you have earned. But you are stripped here, before this court, of the Vael name that you renounced in secret years ago, and will now renounce in the open. You are stripped of every claim, every title, every coin of the family purse. You will leave this kingdom by the eastern road you love so well, under escort to the border, and you will not return within these lands while you draw breath. And every soul standing in this hall will carry out from it and repeat in every corner of this city the truth of this morning, that it was not the harbor woman who brought shame into this court." He let the silence stretch. "It was a son of its own royal house. Remember it." Corwin's mouth opened. Perhaps he meant to beg, or to explain, or to offer some last charming word of the kind that had once won Annette Mender's heart. But he looked for the first time at Aeliana, met her eyes at last across the cold stone floor, and whatever he saw in her face level and unflinching, and entirely unafraid of him now, closed his mouth for him. He said nothing, and the guards led him from the hall, and she watched the man who had left her in the snow walk out of her life a second time, and this time it did not break her. This time she was the one still standing in the warm center of the room, with his son in her arms, and he was the one being led out into the cold. There was a justice in that shape that no court had granted her. She had simply lived long enough, and refused hard enough, to arrive at it. Rowan turned then to Aeliana, and to the whole assembled weight of the court, and he raised his voice now, not in anger, but so that it would reach the furthest furred lord pressed against the furthest grey wall. "This woman," he said, "raised the heir to my throne alone, with nothing. With a needle and 2 hands and a strength, this court would do well to study rather than to whisper about. She asked no one for help, because there was no one who offered it. She refused to lie about her circumstance when a comfortable lie would have spared her every cruelty you dealt her. Refused to invent a dead husband. Refused to hide behind a fiction because she would not build her son's life on a falsehood. And when she was dragged into this very hall as a prisoner, she stood on that stone where my brother now stands condemned, and she told a king to mind his manners." A murmur ran through the court. But it was not the murmur of scorn now. It had turned somewhere in the last fortnight into something like awe, and no one could have said precisely when. She will be honored in this court, not as a mother to be thanked and pensioned and forgotten in a distant wing. She will hold a seat and a standing in this palace that answers to no minister, no council, and no lord, that answers to no one but herself, and to me only as her equal chooses to answer. She is the guardian and the voice of your future king, and she holds that place by her own right, which is the strongest right. There is the right of one who did the thing when no one was watching, and no one would have thanked her. Any man or woman in this hall who whispers otherwise, and here his voice dropped again, back to the quiet that was so much worse than shouting, may bring the whisper to me directly, and we will discuss it, the two of us in this room, before this court. I will make the time. No one, it turned out, wished to discuss anything. They did not marry that spring or the next. Aeliana would not be given to anyone, not to a rejecting mate, not to a corrupt lord, and not to a king she had begun, slowly and against every hard-won instinct in her to trust. And Rowan, to his lasting credit, never once asked her to be given. He seemed to understand, without being told, that the whole of her worth to herself was bound up in the fact that she had never let anyone else decide what she was. That a woman who had refused a king in his own hall could not then be handed to that same king like a settled account, without losing the very thing that had made him want her in the first place. So he did not ask. He waited. He let the seasons turn. What grew between them grew the way the ice on the harbor melts, slowly, and then all at once, and only when the season was truly ready. It grew across the council table, where she proved to have a sharper sense of the kingdom's common people than any minister who had never gone hungry a night in his life, and where Rowan learned to look for her opinion before he formed his own. It grew in the small hours when the boy was ill, and they sat up together, the king of the Iron Throne, and the net-mender of the harbor passing a feverish child between them, and speaking in low voices about nothing and everything. The boy grew tall. He learned to read in the palace library, in a chair too big for him, sounding out the old histories of the kingdom he would one day hold. And he learned to mend nets down at the harbor, his mother's quick fingers guiding his small ones, because Aeliana insisted, over the objection of every tutor in half the council, that her son would know both worlds, the marble hall and the salt waterfront, and would never once make the mistake of thinking the second beneath him. He wore the silver mark on his wrist openly, the frost-fine tracery that had not been seen in 400 years, and no one in the kingdom would ever again dare to call it a stain. On the day he was formally named heir, in that same hall of judgment where his mother had once been brought as a prisoner, it was not a nursemaid and not a council of grey men who placed the small iron circlet in waiting above his head. It was his mother, in a gown the colour of harbour water, standing at the king's side by her own right and no one's leave, the whole court risen to its feet before her, and on the evening the king finally asked, not commanded, not arranged through ministers, not folded a bargain inside a proposal, but asked, on one knee, in the private garden, where they had taken to walking after dark. Aeliana of the harbour district, who had been left in the snow with a threadbare cloak and a purse of coin and a lie about spring, looked down at the man kneeling before her, and understood, fully and finally, that she had never once been the ruined thing the world had named her. She had been, the whole time, exactly what her grandmother had told her. She was old blood, older than the harbor, older than the kingdom, more than the world had expected her to be. And the world had punished her for it, until it couldn't any longer. Yes, she said. But understand me, Rowan, and understand me the way you understood me the first day when I told you no in your own hall. I do not come to you as a rescued woman. I was not drowning. I did not need saving, then or now. I come to you as your equal, and I will stand at your side as your equal, or I do not come at all, not for a crown, not for a throne, not for the softest life this kingdom could offer. I would rather mend nets by the water for the rest of my days than be one more beautiful thing a king keeps in a warm room." "I know," said the Iron King, and he was smiling the smile that made him young again. "I have never wanted you any other way. I could not have. It is the very thing I love. I would not take the equal and leave the fire behind. They are the same woman, and I want the whole of her or none." He took her hand, roughened by salt and rope and years of a needle, and he did not kiss it like a courtier. He held it like a man holds the hand of the person he intends to stand beside for the rest of his life. "Come and rule beside me, Aliana. Not behind me, not beneath me. Beside me. The kingdom has never had a queen who knew what it was to go hungry. I think it is long past time it did. She had raised her son alone, and she had meant once to raise him alone for the whole of her days, and to answer to no one, and to build nothing on any man's promise ever again. And she became, on her own terms, in her own name, by her own refusing and her own choosing, and never by anyone's leave, the woman the whole cold court would one day rise for when she entered a room, because she had, in the end, lifted herself and simply allowed a wise king to recognize it. The snow had melted long ago. The garden was gold with the last of the evening light, warm as the courtyard of judgment had been cold, and the child who would one day be king slept soundly in a palace that his mother had walked into as a prisoner, and would leave some day only as its queen. She had known, that first grey morning in the Hall of Judgment, exactly how this would end. She had simply refused, from the very first word, to let anyone else decide it for her.